Yeah, let's get started. Who is this guy talking to you right now? So my name is Raphael. I am a 3D artist based in Ludwigsburg, Germany. And I usually do photorealistic stuff, and that's also what I'm known for. I'm also doing some PCB renders, like I fell in love with PCBs for some reason. So maybe that's interesting for one or the other from you. So I'm doing how it started, how it's going, like so many of you here. Basically, that's one of my first renders. I started in Cinema 4D. I'm still sort of working in Cinema 4D. I am just adapted or expanded to Blender lately. So this is a very old Cinema 4D R4 version render. And I love glass. I love some sceneries, and I love some machinery. So I basically back then discovered glow, and I put that on the buttons here. Right. So how is it going? So I still love my glass. So that's a cocktail glass, obviously. I still love my sceneries, and I still love my machinery. So that's what I did more or less recently in the last 5 years. So I talked about PCBs. So what is this all about? So basically, I opted for recreating a Raspberry Pi for no other reason than to just do it. And it was a pain, but I think the way an artist has to live is through a little bit of pain. So I retraced all the traces of the PCB. So that's not a photograph. So I spent 2 days in Illustrator doing all the traces. And this is one of my first graphics cards, or the first powerful one that I could game on my 386 machine. So I thought, it doesn't exist anymore. I throw the computer away, unfortunately. So I thought maybe I should recreate it in a computer. Right, so where does Blender and Cycles come in? Because all of this was Cinema 4D and Octane. So 2 years ago, I sat down and wanted to try Blender. So I thought it would be a good idea to do a whole project with it, like from start to finish. So what I did was a small animation project where I basically celebrated the 15K subscribers on my YouTube channel. So, yeah. Thanks a lot. Maybe I'm not doing myself a favor by showing this before the actual presentation, because I had a lot of time, because there was no deadline to it, so I could refine everything, and that was pure Blender and Cycles. So when it comes to this talk here, I was approached by Otoy to do it. So when it came to it, I was about to go on my vacation. And so basically the deadline already shrunk a little bit. And when I came back from my vacation, I thought about what project do I even do here. So basically, I remembered that on Instagram, Matthew Encina, he is a creator, basically a product, what's it called? Architect? No, designer, yeah, thank you. So he suggested some collaboration, so I thought, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. So this is his site, he's called Mod Musings, and he does those keyboards here. I brought the first version with me. And yeah, so what I talked to him, and we basically agreed that we want to do a collaboration. So I thought, hey, that's a win-win-win. I get to hold a presentation. He is happy with his animation, hopefully, and Otoy gets their talk. So win-win-win. But of course, there's a super tight deadline. So it was expected to be 2 weeks from when I got back from the holiday. But then some family drama happened, and I only got 1 week left in the end to do all of this, plus the talk. So, right, as I said, it's not just the project I'm going to show you, it's just the talk as well. And of course, I'm sort of new to Blender, so you all know the situation when you go and do something and say, hey, there's this new software, let's just do it there. And then you end up like taking twice the time because you have to research all the things. Right, so this is, hopefully that works, I just encoded it. Right, this is the project I'm talking about, so enjoy. Huge shout out to Simon Damborg, who did the audio last minute, so it really gives an extra layer to all of that. All right, where are we? So in the whole process that I had to do in 1 week, it started with, luckily, I have been provided with the CAD files from Matthew. So I got into plasticity. Who of you knows what plasticity is? Not too many, okay. I thought everyone would know, but it's a CAD program. You load in CAD data, so construction data for product visualization, or for actually making the product. So what I do here is, usually when you have construction data, is that those boundaries are overlapping. So whenever you have transparent parts, you want to make sure there's a gap in between. Otherwise, you end up with set fighting. At least I think that's what it's called. Has nothing to do with Russia, but right. So you basically add a transparent material, if you don't know, and then you get artifacts. So let me just get the roughness down and move closer, and then you have something like that you probably don't want in your renders. Right. And then the other thing what I do with the modeler, the CAD modeler, is to bevel those edges, or fillet, how it's called in CAD speak. That sounds wrong, but yeah. Right, so it's better, you can use a bevel node, but it's always better to have it in geometry. Even if it's very small, it catches light and makes the thing very realistic. All right, so that's the cat part, computer-aided design, not the animal, although it's very popular right now. So I go through another software that is called MOI, Moments of Inspiration, for creating polygons from the construction data. There's a bridge for plasticity to Blender, but I found the way that MOI is doing it a little bit more intuitive. It's giving you n-gons, but as long as you don't deform the keyboard, it is fine. So even if you would deform the keyboard, you could subdivide it in the settings somewhere. But like, dependent on what shots you have in mind, you subdivide it close or dense enough so it doesn't have any edges, and then you basically create a OBJ or a FBX from it. And then finally, first shot of Blender here. We are at Blender. So for some reason, I needed to import that with a very low scale, so 0.001. That it would match my scale, because I always work to scale in my Blender or in all of my 3D software projects, because when I build up a library, I can just move them back and forth between projects and don't care about the scale, because it already matches. So what I have to do here is apply the scale, obviously, because otherwise, if I shade it later on, then the shaders don't match that nicely. All right, so where are we? Yeah, in the beginning I thought, hey, maybe let's record everything and then do a time lapse over it. But during the time, like when I was going away for a coffee from the computer, I had to remember to pause the recording and stuff like that. So it added up, and as the deadline shrunk and shrunk, I thought, no, that's not the way. So enjoy the couple of basically videos I actually recorded. Also, you can see that it's very meticulous. There's like detail and stuff that you never will see in the video, but I have sort of OCD that I want to do everything very accurate despite the deadline. So I was going about and shading everything rather like for close-up rendering. So that's the first time we see the environment that also had to be modeled and created. So what I did was going to Pinterest and get some inspirations, and then from there model it out in Blender. Also, I did use some assets. For example, the screen and the mouse that you saw is basically an asset that I just brought in, as you would do with tight deadlines. But like a lot of stuff is hand modeled, as the speakers and the pen tray, I don't know if that's the name for it, and the clock. I found an image of the clock on Pinterest and I really liked it, so I had to do it, recreate it, because it's like a little bit different than normal clocks use. So finally, we're at the shading topic. Let's get into the topic of the talk finally, which is polycarbonate. Disclaimer, some of you might think that I have the magic solution where polycarbonate suddenly renders in real time. I don't. Maybe some of you have. Disclaimer, it will always add render time if you have transparent materials. So yeah. Right, let's jump to Blender. So we have a very basic scene with a Suzanne and with a small light source, in which we are basically discovering some of the features that make plastic render plastic, and basically why stuff can take very long to render. So we have some caustics here, and if I take the material and put the roughness down to 0, so we have a completely glossy material, then what we lose is basically those caustics. So in cycles, there are some settings to counter that. So, first of all, let's go to the material base color and set it to 1, otherwise you lose 20% of energy whenever the light is going through a polygon wall of Suzanne. So what we can do is go to the, what's it called, indirect light clamping and set it to 0, and that turns it off completely. So to explain, light clamping is basically limiting the energy that can go through the renderer, basically. So to put it in context, your screen has a brightness of 1 in the scale of brightness. So 0 is black, 1 is the brightest your screen can handle. Like HDR is throwing all of this a little bit into the mix, but let's ignore that for now. And then what 10 or the value in there means that this is basically then 10 times as bright that it would allow. So if you turn it off, you can see that we suddenly get some very noisy renders here. There's some other setting I want to talk about, and this is the filter glossy. So the filter glossy makes the object basically, for the caustics, look as if it was rougher than it actually is. So if we set it to 0.5, you get the same caustic output as if the filter glossy was set to 0 and the material itself was set to 0.5. You can see they're the same. Now, of course, the material itself also looks like a roughness of 0.5. So, where are we? If we go back to 0, you can see that Cycle is struggling quite a bit with those caustics generations. And we have a solution for that. So if we increase the light size, of course it changes the look completely, but then you make the light source more available through the rays, or basically the probability is higher to hit the light source and therefore to generate a more even, less noisy render. Now, there's no talk from me without mentioning Octane. So we are in Octane for Blender right now. So Octane has these exact same problems. If we switch to a glossy material and a small light source, we get those speckles. But Octane recently got a photon tracing kernel. So what we can do is shoot photons from the light source, and if we apply the right settings, you can get very nice caustics in very little time, like this. And I think that's something Cycles could use at some point. So I don't know if any developers are here, but they probably already know. Right. When I use enough samples in Cycles, of course, the results will match. So what I did was I put in 131,072 samples into Cycles and let it run. That's sped up. So you can see it forms the same caustics than an Octane. And if you wait another 10 seconds, I will compare that. And you can see for yourself. It just needs a bit to render, even if it's sped up. Here we go. So like it's the same result. But we don't always need caustics, because sometimes if the keyboard is in the air, or if you have heavy light loss through the material through absorption, for example, then they don't make that much difference. So what Octane has as a setting is a fake shadows option. So if we take fake shadows and turn it on, basically what it's doing, it is calculating the energy that is lost through the reflection of the glass material, and then just taking the energy off of the shadow, or adding it to the shadow, basically. And while it is not that nice to look at if the light is very small, you get a kind of sort of more natural approach if the light is bigger. So our task today is to recreate the fake shadow option inside of Cycles. Oh, first of all, I have made some slides for the Fresnel here. So if you don't know, Fresnel is a very important basic concept about photorealism. So it depends how the light is actually hitting the object, whether you have very little reflection, or if it's very close to the angle of the actual object, then you have very high reflection. So it's basically calculating the probability of the light being either reflected or refracted. In this case, the material is not refracting, it is absorbing. Okay, so that's just another visualization of it. So basically what the fake shadows is doing, if we have this way like this, then a lot of energy is going through, so we have full shadow. And if the angle is very steep, we have a lot more reflection energy, so the shadow should be basically there because less light is going through. All right, so that is basically the way I want to go in cycles. So that doesn't have a fake shadows option, so I thought maybe let's go with a transparent BSDF, so that's a good start. And we don't need to use a solid value or a float value. We can use any shader and plug it into it. So I thought maybe just use the Fresnel. We need to invert it because we need the darker parts on the rim, not on the middle of the object. So when we do that and then just display it, you can see it doesn't look quite right. And this is because, of course, Cycles is doing something very natural, and this is calculating the total internal reflection. So if I go to my Suzanne and invert the normals, or flip the normals, you can see what the inside would look like and the reason why it is so dark. So basically we get a different behavior from the outside to the inside of Suzanne, basically for a realistic Fresnel behavior that I don't want. So I searched, oh, here's the total internal refraction. So if the angle is over a certain steepness, there will be no light output on the boundary condition anymore. You can see that when this ray, the lower ray, disappears. All right, so we need a formula that doesn't use that, so it isn't quite as realistic. So I thought maybe let's use the layer weight. It also has a Fresnel, but no dice here. We also get the same behavior. But on the same note, there's a phasing, and when we try to flip the normals on the phasing, hey, you get the same result. So that's our choice here. So if we use this one here, oh, the video wasn't done playing. So what we can do is basically plug that in instead of our Fresnel. And then what we can do is just use the blend amount to get to the result that we need. Now, this is 99.9% that you ever need, but I like to get nerdy, as you just saw. So let's get nerdy. Right, so why stop here? We have a real Fresnel formula, and the layer weight is not a real Fresnel formula. So first of all, you need to know that the layer weight is not linear. What I mean by that, we start out at black when the race is facing the forward-facing faces and white when it's the side. So you naturally would assume that 45 degree would be a middle gray value, but it isn't. So we need to make it a middle gray value by plug it in the inverted result for some reason to an arc cosine to make it linear. It gives us a linear result, but the result goes from 0 to 90 degree. So this one is not really 90 degree, it's 90 degree in radians, because in computer space we always use radians. So what I need to do is basically divide it by the radians amount of 90 degree. So now we have a 0 to 1 linear value here. So what can we do with this? Basically, what I want to do is use a float curve to remap the Fresnel to it. So let's wait for me to do a float curve. To map stuff to it, we need more control points. So I go with a control point at 0.5 and 0.75. And then, when we're done, there's this cool site called refractiveindex.info. Sorry for your eyeballs here. And you can basically, that's an archive of measured IOR values. So what we actually can do is search our polycarbonate here. So it's in the organic section way down. Here we go. Then we have to set it to the standards that 3D is measured at. That's the Fraunhofer line D. Like, it's basically in the middle of the visible spectrum. That's why it was chosen. So it's like 0.5893 nanometers. What this gives us is a Fresnel curve. And what we can do with this Fresnel curve is measure the 0 point, the 45-degree point, and the 67.5-degree point, which matches with the 0.75 value on our curve here. So basically, that's just a couple of copy and paste operations. And there's this nice little feature where I can basically set up the angle. I'm using non-polarized because 3D software is usually non-polarized results, because that would even give you more overhead and render time, which you don't need. So if you want to reduce a reflection on a surface, for example, and just tune down the shader, don't have a pole filter like in photography. So, and if we've done that, you can of course sample more points to be more accurate, but that gives us a accurate enough result, at least to satisfy my nerdiness, and then go through that and then compare it to Octane. You can see it's almost one-to-one what Octane was giving us. Well, if you go with the first approach that was just controlling the blend value, you get very close, so ignore that. It's just for the nerdiness sake. Okay, so last step here is now we have the shadow and the Suzanne both looking the same. We want the refraction on the Suzanne, so we need to make a little bit of math magic or camera light path magic. So we need to combine both of those shaders with a mixed shader like this. And then we need a light path node, and we need actually two outputs from the light path node, because one lets us get the shadow. So if we plug that in, you get the shadow, but the caustics are still there. So we need to also get rid of the caustics. So that is the diffuse ray, and if we add both of them together, then we get the best of both worlds. We get the shadow without caustics, and then we are finally done with our fake shadows inside of cycles. So that only is the beginning of that, because we set out to actually shade polycarbonate. So let's do this. I think we are quite okay in the timing. So here I just brought in the shader to my material ball scene. By the way, at the end of the presentation, there's a link where you can download that. Right, so let's do the same shenanigans again. Let's go with the transmission, go with the color to full white, and set the roughness to 0. And then basically what you can do then, I showed you the caustics. It looks better, definitely, but it adds some render time that you maybe not want, so you have the choice. There's some things you could do with the caustics still applied, for example, stuff like absorption, because a lot of plastics or transparent materials absorb light as it goes through into certain colors. I'm overdoing it here a little bit, so it's like blue, and if I set it to 500, you can see I get sort of this indigo shader ball. So you can overdo it, but usually it's like very small fractions, so if you do it a little bit, then it can look quite nice. And I'm using not the shader, but I'm using the volume input for it. So the next step is even nicer to get plastic going. And this is, instead of a absorption, we can use, for example, a principled volume and get some volume going. Because some plastics have volume inside of it, and that was a really good example here. I just walked by and thought, oh, I take that to my presentation. So the actual object is very glossy, but it looks kind of rough. And this is not the surface, it's the inside, and this is what I'm doing right now here. So I'm just creating some volume inside to make it foggy. If you render that with caustics, then everything inside of the object, including the volume, will be basically calculated by caustics, and I said it multiple times, those are hard to compute, dependent on the lighting situation. So what you can do, so this is the caustics version, and if you render it with our fake shadow version, it looks like this. So it looks a little bit more playful and a little bit more vibrant, I would say. cloudy soft. Right. So make sure that you, in your light ray depth, set the ray depth for the volume a little bit higher than 0, because otherwise it will just look dark. 1 is already good. I, for some reason, set it to 8. Why not? All right, so next thing is something like, now that we dealt with the inside of the object, let's deal with the outside of the object, and this is the roughness. So we can basically dial in the roughness. Usually you have a reference around that you have to hold against light and study to see what's the best value here. I ended up with 0.35. So this gives us a very clean look, but usually also, I don't know if you see it, like you have some small smudges. So what I always do in all my renders is get some imperfections in there. So I have maps for that, for example, like this. So this object here has UVs, but if you don't have UVs on your object, there's actually a small trick. You can use the mapping from the object, so it's basically object space related. That looks horrible. So you set it to box mapping, and then you can use blended box mapping, and the last thing I want to do is basically adjust the size, and this depends on the size of the object then, if it's applied scale. And basically that's Blender's version of triplanar mapping, at least I think. So then if we plug that into our roughness, then we get some nice variation. Now what I have is a shader that goes from full black to full white, so we get the full range from glossy to fully rough, which might not be what you want. So if you do a visualization of a keyboard, Matthew would say, "What are you doing? This looks horrible." We spent time to make sure it's clean. So what I can do is get my favorite node here, the float curve again, and map the value down so the contrast isn't as high. And if you paid attention, the 0.5 and 0.2 value is around the original 0.35 value that I decided to be the roughness. So you can basically, if it's flatlined, then you get back the original roughness that we had in the material. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. So next and last to the section is the surface structure. It's also basically very basic stuff, what I'm explaining here. I'm just going through the basic steps. You can go wild with every one of those steps. With the surface structure, I'm going with a basic noise setup, so I need a noise texture, and then I plug that into the bump map that I just created. Because not only can the surface have roughness, basically in reality it's all linked. The roughness comes from surface bumps, but if it's very small, then the renderer has a hard time if you do all of it with noise. So you basically break it apart between the roughness that can be done with a shader and then the surface bumps that are visible that then can be split off to the bump map. So I just turned down the shader to 0 to see what's going on a little bit better, because otherwise you have to render all the time the transparency, which takes extra time until you see the bump map. So small trick here. And finally, that's the result. I hope that's visible on screen, that you have like those fine bumps. Usually surfaces have that. You can look at the table in front of you, for example, like at least some amount of it, and you can fine tune that and even mix different noises together to get an even more refined result. All right. Wow, yeah, I must be nervous. I'm faster than I clocked before. So let's go into lighting. Of course, we have a whole scene here that like we did the shading on basically. So what we have here is a couple of key lights to light the scene. We have a HDRI, and the ones who know me know what HDRI I used, the ones from Maxim Ross, and that's the toilet one. Right, so then we have some sunlight, and this is a really great feature of cycles, so we will talk about this in a second. Then I added some more sunlight on the right. That's also something a renderer can do. Just need a little bit more sun to the right. Let's add that. And then a top light. Then I noticed when I placed the keyboard that it was sort of boring, so I added a reflection light, so a light source just next to the screen that shines direction of the camera to add a little bit of highlight. Here it looks quite bright, but when all the other lights come together, then you barely notice it. It just gives a slight accent. And then, yeah, you can see it. There's the screen on-off basically button. So I was saying we are talking about the sun in a second, so this is the time. So basically, those are bigger area lights which are focused. So there's this spread value that you can use in cycles. And basically, I'm just using an image texture that is animated with leaves moving. And then you can control the spread and therefore control the sharpness of the sun. So its art direction, you can make it really sharp or, like I did, a little bit more fuzzy, blurry. All right, so what this all comes down to is a lot of render time. And I didn't stop there. I tried to use the LensSim camera. Who of you is familiar with LensSim? Also, some of you, it's a camera that can simulate real lens clusters from a real-world lens together with aberration and chromatic aberration and all sorts of those things. So I applied that lens to my renders, at least the room renders. For the keyboard, the lens was too close to work because usually you need a certain special lens to get this close to an object. So the max samples, therefore, needed to be really high. I don't know if that's high settings. I say that because in Octane, you don't use that high settings usually. Sometimes. It depends on the scene, let's say that. So I used 8,000 to 16,000 samples and rendered in a QHD resolution. I usually do that because it scales up better than HD to 4K if you even want that. Okay, so thanks is due to the render network because that enabled me to do all of this in 1 week because we are still at the deadline and my workstation was used by me all the time by doing shading and I couldn't use it for rendering at the same time. So basically I have this whole thing now where I go through what the render network is doing, but I think I will run out of time if I do that. So you can go to the hackerspace, they have a booth there if you're interested. So basically, short version is their decentralized render network. That means that your scenes will be uploaded to a server, encrypted, then downloaded to node operators, which can be you, and then rendered on their workstations. So basically you have, when I upload a scene, you basically have like 30 workstations at your hand to render. So instead of 1 frame at a time, I get 30 frames at a time. Right. So yeah, that's the whole presentation part where I go through how to upload and how to download. So that there's a download manager. It looks very nice. They have t-shirts with this, so you can see your frames coming in. And right, so when the render is complete, of course, you usually comp. I don't know, I do. So that's a cleaned up node tree from, like, it looked very messy when I stopped working on it, but for this presentation I cleaned it up a little bit. So I worked in Fusion to comp the result here. So we can go through step by step a little bit. So that's the beauty. That was what came out of the render. I even did break out the lights into different passes, but I rarely used it. So I noticed that the clock was very overexposed at the top right corner. So the first step was to basically get the exposure a little bit in. By the way, I'm going with EXR 16-bit images, so I have the full floating point, so I can bring in overexposed areas again. I did the same thing, but very limited to the keyboard here. So you can see, to get a little bit more shape out of it, I brought in the exposure. Then I had reference images, and the copper bottom was too dark in my renders, so I brightened that up a little bit. Then I used Neat Video for denoising. Now you can't see that here, but also because I used high samples, it was very noise-free to begin with. But I usually use Neat Video to get out some small flickers and stuff like that, only to add noise back in later on. So there's, like, as the sun is on the left side, I added some sort of flaring there. Then I have a vignette, because all good renders need a vignette. And then some glow, same thing. And then the usual S-curve adjustments to add in some contrast. Then color correction, you can maybe see that the wood was a tad too saturated for me, so I desaturated it. Then chromatic aberration, because the chromatic aberration of the lens sim camera wasn't enough for me. And then final color and contrast here to brighten it up, to make it a little bit more warm and nice looking. And then last, the film grain, which you probably also don't see, so I took away the grain and brought it back, but it's a special kind of grain, so it looks different. And then we have the output through a HEX medium-high contrast, so we end up with this. All right, because it was so nice, I'm going to show it to you again. Hopefully that also works. All right, so some things, some tech specs, so or project stats. So of course I used 7 days to make this, in which I had very insane work hours. So I actually worked for 132 hours in this 1 week. Nice. Yeah. And render time on a 5090 would have been 11 days. So that's where the network comes in and helped out. I have a couple of more cards, but still I needed to get basically also a workstation to work on. And things I've learned, tight deadline and a new program to learn doesn't match that well, so it leads to a lot of working hours. Then maybe next time a little less is a bit more, so just make one shot and make it really beautiful maybe, or have more time. And then some things I ran into I didn't quite understand, so at the time I wasn't familiar with the filter width. That led to some problems in the render, which I would have loved to re-render, but yeah, time went out. So yeah, that's always the case. You learn and you adapt in the next project. So I love the interactivity of cycles. No matter what nodes you throw around, it's really snappy and fast. I really love that. And of course, I love all you guys, because whenever I searched for something, there was some forum post that already answered that. So at least it saved me time on my project by not figuring out myself. So thank you.